So much. And I apologize. I have some construction happening like right across the street. Of course, it started right on time at 3 p.m. And so if you hear some super loud machines, I apologize. I'll try and speak over them. But Kylie, thanks for the intro. And it's so nice to reminisce. You and I actually visited those farms in Ecuador that we mentioned together. So always really fun to look back on my memories with fair trade campaigns and with the fair trade community, and honestly ever onward as an advocate. So to share a little bit about my story, I started in fair trade, actually working in a fair trade retail store. So kind of where a lot of people meet fair trade is at the shelf, and is by reading tags or reading the seal on a packaged good or a handmade product coming from thousands of miles away that carries a powerful story with it. So I met that with a job working in a fair trade retail store, selling and promoting fair trade products and teaching customers about fair trade. And that was where I really fell in love with it, because I saw time after time again that really the process by which we bring products to the shelf and take them home and check out at the register, that process is what makes all the difference in an artisan's or a farmer or a worker's life. So that was where my fair trade journey started. And I was in high school. That was kind of my summer job, working in a fair trade retail store. Really dream job. I wish I could go back. And eventually, when I got to college, I kind of thought my fair trade journey or my life in the world of fair trade was over, or just something that I left at home. But when I got to college, I learned about an organization called Fair Trade Colleges and Universities and Fair Trade Campaigns. And I learned that there was this really cool structure and group in place to help carry my advocacy forward and get other students to be really excited about it too. So I became a really involved fair trade advocate, got lots of students excited about fair trade, started a fair trade club on campus. I was the president of our club, and we hosted lots of events and sourced fair trade products and got more fair trade products and ingredients for sale in our dining halls, and started incorporating fair trade into the curriculum of our classrooms, and really kind of fell in love again with the fair trade movement. And from there, I started a fair trade chocolate company called 5 North Chocolate. I launched that about 4.5 years ago. Started to create healthy and delicious fair trade chocolate snacks supporting cacao farmers in both Latin America and West Africa, and learned, again, a heck of a lot about fair trade. Fair trade's the really cool thing about fair trade is that it's not only an ethical movement, it's also a way of doing business. It's a way of interacting with people, both in a supply chain sense and in a consumer sense. So fair trade touches so many things. So I feel like I've worn many different hats in the fair trade world, because you can. Fair trade is kind of multidisciplinary. And yeah, so that's kind of my fair trade journey. Now I ended up at Fair Trade USA, which is yet another exciting kind of twist and turn in my journey. And tips that I would share for other campaigners, other students or activists or advocates, not only in fair trade, but in honestly anything that you're doing. One of the things that I think was the greatest joy was being able to blend other passions and hobbies and fun parts of my life into my fair trade world. So when I actually first got to college and didn't know about fair trade campaigns or fair trade colleges and universities, I quickly became the president of our circus club on campus. So it was originally our juggling club. And I became not only the class clown, but like the campus clown. And it was through that I learned like how to get people's attention, how to teach them about things. And that honestly trained my skill to become a better fair trade advocate. How do I get someone's attention? And how do I teach them a new skill or teach them something that they didn't know about? And so actually I wanted to share a quick photo just to give you a visual, because I feel like, I don't know, you mentioned circus, you mentioned clown, people want a visual. So I don't know if you can see this. This is a presentation that I usually use, so I'm just recycling this one slide. But here I am on the left. That was like when I joined juggling club and started juggling for the campus in college. And on the right, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm on a unicycle. and I'm juggling pints of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. And I was doing that to raise awareness about fair trade, to raise awareness about our club, and to get people excited about it. So my biggest tip for others who are advocating and campaigning, and especially in the world of fair trade, is do what you can to get someone's attention and then drive the story home. So I was juggling pints of ice cream on a unicycle. That sure as heck got people's attention. And then I was able to talk to them about why the heck I was doing that, why I felt it was so important that I would go make a fool of myself on a unicycle around campus, and do that with people, because it was important, and it was important to me, and it really did kind of wake people up. So, you know, we would host like circus events for our circus club and with the juggling club, and we would source fair trade chocolate to put on popcorn for like a carnival themed event. I was involved with our German club. We would source none other than German made chocolate by Divine Chocolate. So I guess my biggest tip for other advocates is to just be creative and blend your passions, because the cool thing about fair trade is it crosses all disciplines. And you can probably relate it to just about anything that you do. And then with that, like, you can transfer those skills to honestly any opportunity, any job, any next step in your exciting journey. So those are my tips. I hope that helps. And I guess I'll let Kylie pass it on to the next one.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben. I do remember a trip to Ecuador fondly. Seems like forever ago now. That was awesome. Really, really good to hear. And some of those quotes I love. I just noted those for the follow-up. So I would love to introduce our next speaker, Jasmine French. She and I have had the chance to work together in several different capacities in the past few years, and I'm so glad to have her on this call. So Jasmine previously served as one of our Fair Trade Regional Fellows. Jasmine first graduated from Vanguard University, working to become a Fair Trade University currently in the May of 2018 with a BA in Business Admin and minors in Religion, Sociology, and Women's Studies. In addition to her role as Development and Marketing Coordinator currently at Second Harvest Food Bank of Orange County, Jasmine also serves on the board of Fair Trade LA, now the largest fair trade town in North America. She worked with campaigns as a regional fellow and a coordinator from 2017 to 2020. And before fair trade campaigns, she was the president of Live to Free, which was the anti-trafficking organization on her campus. She worked towards educating her community members at Vanguard on the issues of human trafficking, ethical consumerism, and fair trade. Jasmine's background is in research, community engagement, and her passion for the fair trade movement has really spurred her work to date. She loves to research, watch documentaries, and educate her friends and family about the importance of fair trade. From this, she's actually launched a fair trade blog, The Little French Press, that highlights food and beverage products that are ethically sourced. So without further ado, I will kick it over to Jasmine to share for a few minutes on her story.
Awesome. Thank you, Kylie. It is so fun to be back on the fair trade and back in the fair trade campaigns world. It's been about a year since I've been on the team. It's been like, my heart's been aching. So I'm really excited to be back in this capacity. Yeah, like Kylie said, my background is with community relations. I first started my social justice like passion as a sophomore in high school when I learned about the issue of human trafficking. I remember being in like history class and my teacher was going over sex trafficking and I was like, are you kidding me? How is this a thing? And from there, I launched an anti-human trafficking club on my high school campus. And then in looking for a place to continue that passion and education, I came across Vanguard, which has a really big justice component under the Global Center for Women and Justice. And so that's where I kind of got involved with the anti-trafficking club there and learned about both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And in a way, labor trafficking is kind of like the underdog of trafficking as a general. It's not as fun to talk about. People don't get as like on fire for advocating for it because there's just so many more layers to it. And I was like, this isn't right. So much more of labor trafficking is what we actually can contribute to as a society. And therefore we have a lot more ability to combat it. And so with our everyday purchases, and that's kind of where I learned about fair trade. And how I came across fair trade campaigns was I was on this club, and one of my like club members was talking. There's like a community. It's not just us. Like, it's not just this little nugget at Vanguard. And so from there, we started our campaign to become a fair trade university, and we launched this big fair trade fashion show that brought on about 300 people, with students and leaders and businesses within the Orange County, Southern California area. And that's how I got connected with Fair Trade LA. Is our current executive director was a part of the show, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's even bigger. Like, it's more than just it's more than just Orange County. And so that's how I got involved with Fair Trade LA, where I get to serve on the board, overseeing our social media and communications. And that has just been a blast, as we just accomplished becoming the largest fair trade town in North. And so now our next big trek is to make the 2028 Olympics Fair Trade that's coming to LA. So we're in the works of getting that together and starting to talk with the proper people and getting connected there. Okay, I'm looking at the questions. So what am I doing now? So now, now that I've graduated, I serve on the board for Fair Trade LA, but I also work at a nonprofit down here at a food bank doing development and marketing. So I help tell the story about those who are experiencing food insecurity. And it's really interesting, some of the parallels between those who are experiencing food insecurity in Orange County and how it kind of relates to the global issue of poverty and food insecurity. And so it's been really interesting trying to connect those with the people at the food bank, and even to get some sourcing of fair trade as we push that out to community members. And so that's been really fun to try and help our sourcing team actually source fair trade produce and products that we actually get to send out to those who are experiencing, who are needing food, as well as like trying to get some of our merch fair trade. So that's been really a fun thing to kind of connect the two worlds. What I would suggest for students who are looking to continue in fair trade post grad is just to continue, similar to what Ben was saying. I'm big trafficking, and I found fair trade as like a nugget, as one piece to solve this one issue. And so find passions and figure out and see how it relates to fair trade, and try and intermingle those, as well as to continue finding your community like outside of your campus. It has been the biggest blessing and source of joy to be able to be a part of the Fair Trade LA team, as well as be able to be so close to the Fair Trade Long Beach retail collective, being able to be a part of that community as well. Just having the ability to have community outside of campus really helps you to build relationships and network in ways. I remember going into the Fair Trade Long Beach store, and I walked in, and Teresa, who like runs the whole thing, was like, oh my gosh, this person knows you. And I'm like, they know me? How do they know me? I'm not even that cool. And so it's just so cool how you're able, like, just this community is so small, but yet so big at the same time. And so as you continue to meet people, just be intentional with that, especially people that are not directly related on campus, but outside of that. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I'm supposed to say. No, okay. There's questions, let me know.
Thanks, Jasmine. That was great. I do think that there are some questions in the chat for a link to your blog. If you have that, if you can drop that in there. I looked for it, but I couldn't find it.
Yes, I will send that to you. It's been a little bit on the DL for a little bit, but I will send it to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jasmine. Great. So I put in a note here in the chat. We will have lots of time for questions, which I'm always a big fan of, especially considering that, again, we'll share the recording out, and I know that we want to get the dialogue in front of other folks in the network too. But if you think of things for our speakers as you're listening, please go ahead and feel free to drop them in the chat here. So next we'll hear from Jonathan White. So Jonathan White is director of the Bentley Service Learning Center at Bentley University, and he is the Associate Professor of Sociology at Bentley as well. Jonathan's primary areas of specialization are inequality, post-poverty, globalization, human rights, nonprofits, social entrepreneurship, and service learning. Dr. White has received numerous teaching and humanitarian awards, including the annual Faculty Award at Colby College, Bowdoin College, and Framingham State University. He was founding director of Sports for Hunger and the Hunger Resource Center. Dr. White has served on many boards of directors and advisory boards, including Peace Through Youth, the Graduation Pledge Alliance, why we're all here today, Waltham Family School, the Seed Financial Literacy Movement, Global Education Council for the Millennium Campus Network, which I know some folks on the call are familiar with, and the Student Clinic for Immigrant Justice. Professor White has served as a strategic organizational consultant for numerous nonprofits, including Fair Trade campaigns. And Dr. White has authored articles and book chapters in the fields of inequality, globalization, and service learning. Dr. White's current research is toward a book titled Rising Up, Young Activists Leading Us in Human Rights, Equity, Planetary Survival, and Social Justice. So we're really happy to have him on the call today. Take it away, Jonathan.
Note to self, edit bio. Oh my God. Thank you for that, Kylie. It's good to see you, and so many faces that I know, and so many new faces or names that probably have faces behind them somewhere in Zoom land. I apologize, I've been off camera too. I'm in this little town near the Arizona border doing my research. It's a little town called Patagonia. It's a town of 900 people, and it has one cable for cell phone and cable and everything, and so we're in and out. But wow, how empowering to hear these stories and to reconnect with folks. So thank you for having me here. So yeah, I mean, I'll tell you a little bit about my journey into both Fair Trade and Graduation Pledge, and both of those came through my students, which is the best way to have a journey. And when I was at a campus called Bridgewater State University, which is one of the state universities in Massachusetts, teaching there, my students first learned actually about the Graduation Pledge Alliance. And they asked me, I had worked with my students at Colby College, and we had it there, and at Bowdoin College, and we had it there, and I had mentioned it, and my students at Bridgewater said, let's get it here. So the Graduation Pledge, for those of you who don't know, let me just, I'm going to drop a link in there in a minute, but also the pledge itself is, I pledge to explore and take into account the social and environmental impact of my personal choices as a consumer and community member, as well as any job I consider. I will work to improve these aspects of any organization for which I work or volunteer. Every kid graduating high school, every kid graduating university in this country should be taking that pledge, and we should be providing them the resources to help them to live those values. And who does that better than Fair Trade and Fair Trade campaigns? So such an incredible marriage between these organizations. So for that, what my students did was they went to the commencement committee on campus and asked if they would include this green ribbon when you cross the stage to represent that you've taken this pledge. So you sign the pledge, then you get the ribbon and you wear it at commencement. And the school actually said no. They were worried about it, interfering with the regalia, and all of this, the pomp and circumstances. Those were a very well-trained group of students who knew how to make administrations feel the heat. And so long story short, the graduation pledge took place there. At my current university, Bentley University, we have several hundred students who have to fill a 120-hour commitment of service learning and civic engagement, and then they take the pledge in front of their parents at a separate ceremony connected to commencement. It's rather beautiful, and they write an essay about it as well. Pretty incredible. With Fair Trade, my goodness, same group of students at Bridgewater, they decided they wanted the university to become Fair Trade. So a couple years out, they started throwing a Fair Trade fair. And gradually got more and more vendors to come, and they made it fun and they made it exciting. And then they got professors to give extra credit to bring their students there. And then they started showing Fair Trade films once a month on campus. And then they did a mock sweatshop right in the middle of the student center. And they did all of these things. And then they went to the president and asked if he would be willing to sign us into becoming a Fair Trade university. And he did. And even after that, we faced resistance from the bookstore. And and the cafeteria and the other supply chains. But the president was behind us. Had signed this petition along with 999 other people on campus. He was the 1,000th signature. And my students held them to it, and so Bridgewater became a fair trade campus. But just to say, there was some work there, and but I was so happy because it was supporting all the values that all of us on this call support, and actually that education is there to teach, but also because it wasn't easy, and my students learned this set of skills, and I'm so happy to say that literally all of the students from that cohort, which is about 12 years ago, are involved in social justice or environmental careers now in their life. Every single one of them, and they're powerful. They're continuing on, and I would guess that lots of the students who kind of participated in parallel, signed that petition, signed that pledge, in some way supported. I bet you many of them are as well. So. My biggest suggestions are be careful who you go to first. If you go to your president and they say no, you got a problem on your hands. So you want to go to that. You want to think about your hierarchy. Get a professor on campus, perhaps somebody tenured, doesn't have to be, but it protects them, who's willing to have your back no matter what. Let them help you navigate through it. Let the students be in front and be the force, and the adults on campus standing behind. The Office of Sustainability almost always will be a partner, both for the graduation pledge and for Fair Trade University. And the biggest issue is always with the suppliers. So on my campus, we've had trouble with Sodexo, and the reason is of course, fair trade products cost a little bit more, and we all know that that's because we're paying the labor and taking care of the planet. So every penny is worth it. But that to them, they're thinking profit. But the great thing is, and the same with like with Barnes and Nobles and the suppliers for athletic teams on campus and whatnot. In all of those cases, nobody here would be inventing the wheel. All of these suppliers have had students and campuses challenge them or work with them, and all of them on some campuses are doing Fair Trade University, or doing the Graduation Pledge Alliance. So there's no single lesson, there's no single way to go about things. In the end, the best thing to do is have a cohort of students with you, a faculty member behind you, perhaps an office like mine. I run the Center for Service Learning and Civic Engagement. Students come to me with this kind of stuff, I'm in. But usually Office of Sustainability or Diversity or other great offices for these as well, they're usually in on these types of things. And then start to create a plan and know what your contingency plans are, so that if you go and you ask for something and somebody on campus says no, you know either who to go to next or how to get around them. And once you do that, it'll happen. On the other hand, just last thing I'll say is I've seen many campuses where it went easy. It just matches the values of the campus and the people who happen to be in power on the campus at the time. And it just took a student to bring it to them. And then they said, yeah, we should do this. The president of that college that I was telling you about, Bridgewater State, did the greatest thing when my students went to him to sign the petition. He said no. And they said they were so disappointed because they thought they had him. And he said, I won't sign this until you promise me that the second I sign it, you're going to come to my office the next day and watch me as I call all the presidents of the other state universities and tell them they need to do the same thing. So they happen to have an incredible advocate with them in that case. And he did that. And we got some of the other campuses going and whatnot. But there's no single, the only lesson is that there is no lesson other than if we want social justice, we need to work for it, find the ways, take the pledge, and then put it into action.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was amazing, and so nice to have your perspective as someone who has worked with the actual graduation pledge for so long. And also, thank you for joining us from Patagonia. I think it's pretty incredible to have you joining us from the far reaches, and the work that you're doing down there right now is just super important. And
Kylie,
awe.
emails you or calls you and you come.
Yeah. Thank you for making time for this network and for our audience while you're there. Wow, well, so many good insights being shared. last but certainly not least, I'm really pleased to have Tori Curbelo on this call. Tori also comes to us from having been involved in fair trade campaigns for an awfully long time in one role or another. So Tori served as a Fair Trade Campaigns Fellow actually in our inaugural 2015 to 16 program. And what's really special about Tori is Tori came into her role when I came into mine. So her and I were able to come up the Fair Trade Campaigns ranks together and really learn about the organization at the same time. So really takes me back to think about, Tori's inaugural role with us. For many years, Tori has since served on the Mid-Atlantic leadership team, now the Eastern leadership team. She serves currently as the Director of Education, Training, and Advocacy at Lifeway Network, an organization which provides safe housing for women survivors of human trafficking, based in New York City, I do believe. Tori carries experience from UNICEF USA, the International Rescue Committee, and WIN. Tori enjoys connecting with individuals around the urgency of taking action against exploitation, and she has engaged multiple audiences everywhere from the United Nations to Times Square in issues around anti-trafficking, human rights, and fair trade. Tori continues to use her platform to educate communities on how buying fair trade offers an opportunity for consumers to combat trafficking. Tori is also one of the lead organizers of the Fair Trade Manhattan campaign, working under the New York City Fair Trade Coalition to make Manhattan a fair trade town, as well as neighboring boroughs. So really excited to have Tori on the call with us. Go ahead and take it away, Tori.
Thank you. And it's so nice to meet all of you. I'm Tori Curbelo, and I was just astonished with how similar my trajectory has been to Jasmine's. And I would just wish, I was sitting here wishing that I had someone like Jasmine around, because actually my journey was fairly lonely for a very long time. So just to take a step back, yes, I work at Lifeway Network. We provide safe housing for women survivors of human trafficking. And I get to do what I love, which is really to explain that exploitation surrounds us. But at the same time, there's ways that we can take action against it. And fair trade has followed me even since my fellowship in various different capacities. I actually had to take a second to reflect back, and I was like, oh yeah, I did this and that, and it never really left me, which is quite wonderful to think about, and think about how it's just become so second nature to my life, something that I had to, at once upon a time, really think about, where could I find fair trade products? What does that mean? What's the label? And now it's boom, boom, boom. So I guess my journey was very, very similar to Jasmine. I was sitting in a class and our teacher had passed out an article about child labor. And I was just astonished to realize that it was an abuse, where on one side of the supply chain, I was living a life where I could get an education. I was in a private school in the Upper East Side. And if I had an injury, theoretically, I could go to the hospital. And then on the other end of the supply chain is likely a child or a person who's being paid nothing. They typically do have some type of health condition, whether that's back pain from carrying heavy loads, and not able to attend school. Usually it's usually one or the other. And something about that felt very wrong to me. And class just kind of moved on, was dismissed. And I didn't really have any answers. And something about that just stuck with me, and I couldn't feel content. So I feel like I spent the next couple of years trying to explore my role a little bit better. And even in seminars I attended and talking to people, kind of the reaction people had was just, well, what can we do about it? Or I remember one time submitting a paper about consumer activism, and the professor was just like, well, what can consumers really do? But I never really stopped there. And fast forward later, I was interning with UNICEF USA's End Trafficking Project, and I came to learn about fair trade, which really just spoke to me because of how multifaceted it really is. And the fact that it's not just about workers' rights, but also ties in environment, community rights, and isn't just working from a siloed area. And I remember getting off a plane and I saw the advertisement for fellowship with fair trade campaigns. And I was like, was this created for me? Like, did someone know about my interest? Because sometimes you look at these job descriptions, and parts of it might speak to you, and then parts of it you feel like, that either wouldn't interest me or maybe my skills aren't there, but everything just spoke to me. And in that, I got to learn the ins and outs about working with campaigns. And it's continued ever since then. So I stayed on the Mid-Atlantic committee, but then even in various roles I had. So just to give brief examples of how I've tried to integrate fair trade into my life. I was at a workplace for a family homeless shelter. I was working as a research analyst, and I noticed that we had fair trade coffee. And so I wanted to thank whoever was procuring the items. And it's funny because I found out who it was. I had to do a big search because it was a huge organization. And I went up to the person. I was like, hey, are you responsible for procurement? And the person was like, yeah, why do you want to know? And I was like, oh, well, I noticed that we had fair trade coffee. And I had a conversation with that person, and she just basically said she had no idea, but her demeanor changed right away. And she says, usually when people come to talk to me, it's to complain about something. I had no idea that we were doing something positive that people care about, because we're just ordering items at the end of the day. We're not really thinking too much about it. So that was cool. And I worked also with the sustainability committee within my organization to try to integrate fair trade into the work that they were trying to do internally in the organization. Even I think Make Manhattan Fair, the campaign, that kind of found me too. I never really signed up for it, but in working with the women, what I love about the campaigns, whether it's a university or it's working on a city, is just how it can be tailored, and it can be adaptable to whatever is going on in society. So with the murder of George Floyd last year, we put on a film screening of the film 13th to talk and have a conversation about prison labor and what are alternative products that we could use. So we had a conversation about fair trade, and that was through also not just the Make Manhattan Fair, but also through my job at Lifeway Network. I'm trying to think of what else. There's different examples throughout the year. We did like a fashion screening. So just connecting these different issues has been really fun. Whatever I'm working on in my life, whatever organization I'm a part of, there's always a way to incorporate fair trade. Even with the Safe House workers, I have to do monthly trainings for them. And we did a conscious consumerism workshop. And just as Jasmine said before, sometimes people only think about the sex trafficking side or a different component, organ trafficking. And I'm like, hey, if we come into work every day, we have to practice what we preach, so to speak. So do we question the commodities that we're buying? And the workers come to us from different walks of life. They come to do development, they come to support with administrative stuff. So not all of them are coming from a social justice lens, but to be able to integrate that and make the work that we're doing more tangible for them is very, very exciting for me. I think my advice for the future, I think it's that if you're part of a fair trade campaign, those skills are marketable. Those are very important skills, whether that's community organizing, putting together an event, talking with your administration. Those are very, very important skills, and skills you can put on a resume, skills you can talk to, examples you can draw from, and skills you can continue to hone. So don't try to de-emphasize your experience or think that it was just part of a club or just part of something you did momentarily. Those are important skills that lead to tangible action.
Wow, thank you, Tori. Some really, really great insights there at the end. And I just love the breadth of your experience too. Again, having been with our team for so long now in various capacities. One of the fair trade campaigns pioneers for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you to all of our speakers. Really just a stellar lineup. I was really excited to bring this particular group together. We do have some time for Q&A. So a couple questions came through in the chat, and I would also encourage anyone who is with us to just unmute and ask a question of any of our speakers. So first, let's get to this one in the chat, and then again, whether it's in the chat I can field or in the Q&A yourself. So this is for Ben or whoever knows about this from Jackson. Jackson's one of our Western leadership team members and lead organizer of the Arizona State University Fair Trade Campaign, largest fair trade university in the country. How do you create a fair trade certified product and brand? So thinking about you're launching a 5 North and that experience. Granted, this is different in every industry, but how did you go about starting this? Finding people at each level of the supply chain who adhere to fair trade principles, or if you have suggestions of resources for this, that would be very helpful. So I know that's probably a real loaded question, Ben, but if you want to take maybe a stab at the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kylie, and thanks, Jackson, for your question. I actually get this question a lot, so I'm happy that there's a lot of interest in like learning how to source fair trade products and sell them. There's really 2 kind of ways to go about it. If you are sourcing a handmade artisan good, you can apply for membership through the World Fair Trade Organization or the Fair Trade Federation. And they guide you essentially through the process of ensuring that your artisan groups are adhering to the principles of fair trade. If you are trying to certify a commodity or a factory produced good through fair trade certification, then the 2 ways that you go about it are either A, sourcing from already certified supply chains. So if you source from an already certified fair trade factory or an already certified fair trade cacao farm or fair trade coffee farm or coffee co-op, then I mean, it's pretty straightforward at that point, which is kind of nice because if you're a smaller company sourcing on a smaller scale, you're actually probably already tapping into supply chains that are already established. So you would look for one that's already certified fair trade. If you are looking to certify a supply chain that isn't already certified, you would essentially nominate that producer, which would then have to go through an audit and an inspection through a fair trade certifying body. That's a much longer, larger, more intense process, and typically one that a larger company would tackle. So I hope that kind of answers your question. The easiest way is to find an already certified supply chain and just increase the demand and start sourcing straight from that co-op or that farm or a company that's sourcing in that way already. Those are my Cliff Notes.
Thank you so much.
Happy to talk further too if you want to chat it through or have an idea.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Okay, this question is for Jonathan from Holly, and Holly is based in Burlington, Vermont. So for Jonathan, what kind of advocates or groups of students were the most effective starting and running campaigns on your campus specifically? What qualities did these students that you worked with possess? And what would you say was the most rewarding thing for you to witness throughout all of the schools you've been involved in terms of student engagement? So I know those are also some loaded questions. Feel free to take them in any order you want.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, Burlington, Vermont. Hey, we're just down the road, so call on us anytime. We can be of help as well. And what a great city. And by the way, you have advocates not just on campus there, but that city is just filled with advocates for fair trade and conscious consumption. So what was the best qualities of my students, at least, that were able to make these things move forward was that they were organized. So they met every week. They had a plan in place and they contingency planned it. So it wasn't just like, let's just become fair trade or let's just become a graduation pledge campus. They literally had, 5, 6, 7-page plans, which would say, let's first approach this. If this doesn't work, let's do this. But even before that, and this is part of becoming a fair trade university, before that, they really created an awareness and excitement about the products and the concepts on campus. They even hooked in, economics and business professors because that makes sense. They would get their students down to the fair trade fair to learn about this alternative business model, which was really different than what they were teaching their students in class. And so there was momentum by the time they went to become a fair trade university. And therefore, when they hit the roadblocks, which were, in this case, it was the outside vendors. And the reason the campuses struggle with outside vendors is because if you have an outside vendor that's doing your cafeteria work on your campus, what most students probably don't know is that in order to get that contract, that vendor, whether it's a Sodexo or Aramark or whoever it is, they're kicking money back to the school. So it's kind of a deal between the two. And there's a huge contract, usually multi-year contract between the two. Same with the bookstore provider, whether it's Barnes & Noble or whoever it might be. There's a deal there. So in the case of this university, Sodexo was the provider, and they actually were kicking back a building, a science building to the campus. So the president, even though he was on our side, and a lot of the folks on campus were, you know, there was a contract and there was a building. So he was nice enough to call us in his office and say, you have to create enough student pressure on me that I can go and renegotiate. So what they did was they were so connected with, from everybody from the president to literally the workers in the cafeteria to the other students on campus. So they didn't see these siloed movements. So the Ahana Club and the Sustainability Club, and they were the Social Justice League and whatever. They didn't see these as different groups. They coalesced the entire group. So they already had this social capital. They created this social capital. And then when they went to move things forward, they were super effective, the most effective groups I've ever seen. In fact, if I can, before we leave, I'll try, in one of my books, there's a bit of a piece in one of the chapters about them and how they did that. But ultimately, and they were so smart, they called students from other campuses that had been successful, right? And they called fair trade campaigns and folks like Kylie and Ben. So they were smart enough to take advantage of the resources that were out there, and it worked really well for them. Honestly, Kylie, the problem isn't what order to take the questions is. The problem is that I'm old and I have no idea if I covered the questions.
Oh, Jonathan, you're not old. I mean, in this crowd, you know, we do have a lot of younger, what you call millennial activists, but don't call yourself old. No, that was great. And I think Holly just chimed in the chat that you hit on all the points there.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else have any questions for Jonathan or for Jasmine or Tori or Ben? Feel free to unmute and ask, or you can drop them in the chat here.
I saw one from Teresa, which was really sweet. Hey, Teresa, really good to see you on the call. Teresa and I met in person, and it's funny how you have to like specify that you met someone in person because these days that's like few and far between. Teresa and I met in person in real life many years ago. How many years ago was that? Like 2013, 14 maybe?
Yeah. We both have made it to the West Coast from that blustery.
I know. We've both fled the East Coast. I'm only very newly on the West Coast. So is the fair trade vibe super different coast to coast? I don't really know yet, but in general, I find the West Coast to be a bit more progressive and definitely embodies the values behind fair trade a little bit more boldly. So I'll see if that hypothesis comes true and check back in with me. I'll let you know.
Amen. Nice to see you here.
Good to see you too, Teresa.
This is Joan Harper. I'm in LA, and Ben, we go back a ways. Of course, Teresa's part of our group, and Kylie, but also Jonathan, we met at your university however many years ago when we had a fair trade gathering there. So that was good to see you again. Yeah, I recognized you as soon as I saw you. But I guess just anybody would want to answer. I always like to look at the positive side, and there's a lot of things to be positive about. But if one or any of you wanted to just share something that you really see has changed for the better in the fair trade world, and that's a broad question, and it can be a product or availability or awareness. I don't know, just something that just over these number of years that you've been involved, that for the better, you know, you see hope, I guess.
I mean, that's a Kylie or Ben question, but I'll just pop in general. You know, so I've been teaching for 30 years. Do the math. Kylie's like, oh, he is actually old. And
let's not talk about old, okay?
And there's a difference in the students. My students come in much more socially conscious and much more aware that their actions, particularly on the planet, matters significantly, and they're seeking out more and more conscious avenues. So when we used to talk about fair trade, I mean, it was a big sell because it was a complete paradigm change in terms of just ideology. And now it's not a big sell. I can explain fair trade so much more simply to my students, and you know, they're either like, sign me up, or they're already like, well, let's do that, but you know, even do this, and let's also add this in and that in, and you know, the same with the graduation pledge. It's this idea of, yeah, we do pledge to you know, do better and look at wherever we work for make sure that the planet's being taken care of and that people are being taken care of, but that's not enough. We have to be restorative. So if you're looking for something hopeful, I moved intentionally from State University over to kind of a business college, a really traditional business college, to see what would happen if I played in that sandbox. And I'm so impressed with there's a lot of work to be done. I'm not gonna lie, Joan. And a lot of it has to do with the faculty and the curriculum. But the students, I'm blown away at how much they want to be the next generation of business leaders, to take us to better models and to embrace the current models that are there, such as fair trade and sustainability. I went there to kind of push the limit, and I'm being pushed by my students.
Something I've noticed is just the availability of fair trade. Now people ask me, hey, Tori, you talked about fair trade. Where can I find it? I'm like, almost everywhere, at least in the metro New York area. I forgot that one of the campaigns I helped with was located in the South Bronx, and they were super interested in it because a couple of topics that were of interest for them was food insecurity and food justice. And it was a real issue in terms of catering fair trade options, because this was before Uber Eats, before Seamless, before we could really get fair trade to the campus so they could source it. And that was something we were working towards, but even just how they could access it on a day-to-day around in the neighborhood. They were like, where are we going to go? Whole Foods, we're not really shopping there. But now I see it in bodegas, I see it in corner stores, I see fair trade like everywhere. And it could just be because I recognize it more. But I really feel that just the opportunities for it and accessibility of it has really grown, just even in the last couple of years, because I haven't been doing this for that long, but maybe even in the last 5 years, I would say.
Jasmine, you want to take a stab?
Sure. I was like, are you gonna go?
Fair trade jinx.
I would definitely say that I feel like people are more aware of it, and I think at least in my experience, I feel like out of the group, I feel a little bit less. My full-time job is not in the fair trade world. It's definitely a little bit outside of that, and so I've just been, maybe it's my influence at work, I don't know, but like people know what it is and they get excited about it. I get texts on the weekly about, oh my God, Jasmine, I just found this fair trade thing. And I'm like, yes. And people get excited about going to Target and getting their pair of fair trade jeans. And so it's been really exciting to see people not only become aware of it, and I've heard less and less people calling it free trade. Like they're getting a grasp on what fair trade is, and also I think in a good way they're also starting to question fair trade, like to help progress the movement in a good way. Like, okay, like this is great. What are the blind spots? What are the pockets, and how can we like even make fair trade even better for the future? So that's something that I've noticed in conversations with the people that are around me in LA and Orange County.
That's great, Jasmine. And I'll just close this out really quick. Joan, I really appreciate your super positive, positively framed question to keep us positive. This morning, actually, I was the questioner / reader for someone's thesis. And it was actually a high school student who wrote a 25-page thesis on free trade versus fair trade. And what got me so excited about this thesis was how unbiased the analysis of free trade and fair trade was. And and how like ultimately the conclusion came to be that fair trade benefits people more than free trade. And there are solid arguments for both. But what got me really excited is after the half-hour presentation, after my half hour of tough questions, or as tough as I could make them for a high schooler, after that we had about an hour of all the students in the class arguing about free trade versus fair trade and bringing up like some really tough points about both cases. So I think what got me excited was that like I knew that young Gen Z generation was excited and passionate about the way businesses operate and the way that consumers think about products on the shelf. Like they were excited and passionate about that. And ultimately, I believe that when consumers and businesses are passionate about the way things are done, they're going to end up doing things in a more sustainable, ethical way because they care about them, they learn about them, and then they make better decisions based on that knowledge. So just the fact that today, my experience was Gen Zers being super excited about fair trade and free trade. That gets me excited.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. These are really great questions. Last couple minutes, there's 2 questions in the chat. I think they're both really meaningful. So I want to ask both and just bundle your answers, all of our speakers, into one short answer if you can. It's the ultimate test here at the end of the call. So the question from Claire. Claire comes to us from St. Joseph's University. She sits on our Eastern Leadership team. She's also the student CEO of SJ Brew, which is a student run coffee company out of St. Joseph's. They're sourcing directly from Nicaragua, where pre-COVID they were taking trips down there. It's a wonderful story. So happy to have you, Claire. And Claire's asking, what is your kind of quick elevator pitch, your go-to pitch on fair trade? Do you consistently change how you explain it based on the context? So Claire in her role is always looking for different ways to phrase fair trade. And then there's a question here too, which I'd love to wrap on. How do you avoid burnout? How do you keep going with this work, and how do you keep fueling your advocacy every day? So if we could all close on that, and maybe we'll start with you, Ben.
Okay, sure thing. I'll be super quick. Typically with fair trade, I'll mention like the base of fair trade is fair pay, safe working conditions, no child labor. Like that's the easiest way to explain what fair trade is. If you want to go one step further, I talk about the premium and I talk about community development funds that supports the communities. But those are the 2 pieces I'll mention. Preventing burnout, I don't think I do a very good job of that. I think I have a long way to go and a lot to learn about self-care and making myself the best that I can be. Deep down, I know that it's all about you, the advocate, who's going to go and make change. So the healthier and in a better mental state that you can be to do that, the better it is for your advocacy and eventually the impact that you're going to make. So I'm all for self-care and not burning out. I need to go practice it. So thanks for that question, Holly, and thanks for your question, Claire.
Thanks, Ben. Let's see. Jasmine, do you wanna close us out with these 2, and then we'll move on to Jonathan and then Tori?
Sure. I was like, are we getting called on? I, similar to Ben, it on in a context of a social justice element. If we're talking about the Black Lives Matter, are we talking about women's rights? Are we talking about garment workers? That kind of helps me know what pieces of fair trade to highlight. And also like depending on the age of the person. So if it's someone that is around my age, I more so bring in the social element and the corporate social responsibility aspect. If it's someone who's older, I typically bring in how it's good for business. So that kind of helps me at least know what lens to utilize. When it comes to self-care, I am like Ben, I burn myself at 3 ends. But I'm learning to carve out time to have nothing on the calendar, whether it's an hour or 2. Last night it was 3 as I watched Handmaid's Tale. So like it's just carving up little buckets of times that you can refuel and then be able to pour back out. Because I've learned the hard way that if you can't pour if there's nothing in your cup.
I love that. I'm absolutely using that quote in the follow-up email. So Warning, you will be quoted. Thanks, Jasmine. That's great. Jonathan, do you want to close us out with this, with your fair trade pitch, and then how do you avoid burnout?
Sure, great questions, by the way. So the fair trade pitch, I mean, you know, they nailed it. The only thing I would add is I always just personalize it. Like I'm willing to pay a little bit more to know that the person on the other end is getting paid along the whole production line, and that the planet is being cared for. So I'm willing to pay a little bit more for that. And if it means I can buy a little less, I'm willing to do that too. And that usually catches people. And then burnout. I mean, you know, look, you've got Joan on this call. She's an amazing activist and has been doing it for years, and I look up to her for that. You have Bill Benet, who's runs the Graduation Pledge Alliance for years, and himself is an incredible activist in many ways, and myself, who's slightly older than you all as well. And it's you know, they talk about it as work-life balance, but I see it more as saying no when there's something that's worthwhile, but it's not worth your time at that moment because you have other things you need to focus on. And taking care of yourself, exercising and sleeping, of course, eating well. But then my biggest two secrets have been, one, I made sure that the person I fell in love with and married and spend my life with is equally committed to things as I am. It's a journey we're on together, and it's remarkable. It's energizing because it's constantly challenging, but in the right ways. And then the second is I actually there's so much important work to do in the world for social justice, and there's so little of me and so little of us. So ultimately I can't do it all. So I'm very picky about what I do. I do it all day long, every day. It's all I do is social justice work. But I'm very picky about what I fill with and who I do that with. So I only work with people who bring me joy. Because there's plenty of people working on social justice that it's just they're not doing it for you. Their energy is not doing it for your energy. Work with people who do for social justice, and all of the other stuff becomes so easy.
Cool. Great question. So I think for the storytelling, or not storytelling, the personal pitch, I'm constantly modifying my personal pitch. Even listening to Jasmine, I'm like, wow, her story was much more concise. There's things I can cut out. And I think one of the best things I ever did was take a storytelling class, which at first I was like dismissive. I was like, I don't need to learn how to tell stories. I've been doing that since I was like 3. I can do that. And then I learned about the techniques and how I could modify, and I tend to ramble, and it was actually really useful. And I think I would do it again. So yes, I think that it's constantly being modified. It depends on the context, as was mentioned before. And it's really useful way to connect with certain people who, because there's different types of learners. Some people connect with numbers, some people really connect with the story, which I'm not the best at. So yeah, and that goes for personal pitch stories, just same kind of theme. And then the second one, in terms of burnout and how to manage that, I'm still learning, but I think being a model in your environment, there's lots of people who say that they're for that and then don't practice that. So I think positive deviance is always a good thing, even when you're afraid of how that might come off. But it's important to practice what you preach. Like I said before, I use that phrase twice in this short time, but I think that's important.
Awesome. Thank you, Tori. Wow. I mean, I have been on a lot of these calls over the last 6 years, and I have to say I'm really inspired with this particular lineup of speakers and you all sharing your stories. So thank you. Appreciate everyone coming together. It's a really busy time of the year for folks. I know a lot of our students and graduates are in the throes of finals right now. So again, we did record the call and we'll be able to share this out with the network afterwards, which will be wonderful. Huge thank you to Jonathan, to Ben, and to Tori and Jasmine for everything that you shared. One more question in the chat here. I see Carolina's wondering if, Ben, you can just repeat the 3 main pieces of your your fair trade pitch. If
Yes,
you'd
I'm
like to
typing it now.
connect, great. If you'd like to connect with any of the speakers, I am happy to put you in touch as well. So follow up with me afterwards. And thank you, everyone. And on that note, we've got a note in the chat here from Bill Bennett. One more note on burnout. Have fun. Yes, have fun with your advocacy, have fun with your working the issues and moving the work forward, because yeah, if there's not joy in it, then what are we here for? So thanks everyone, and have a great evening and a good weekend, and we will follow up with everyone soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice meeting y'all. Thanks for coming.
Bye, Callie. Bye, everybody.